When Andrei rescued an abandoned puppy, he could never have imagined that in just a few months he would find out that it was not a dog at all, and that in order to save it, he would have to completely change his life. Andrei Musenko was loading his purchases into the car when something on a nearby truck caught his attention. In the back seat was a small cage with a tiny puppy inside. The dog looked so sad and depressed that it touched Andrei's heart, but the puppy was also beautiful. He had fluffy fur and cute eyes, and Andrei immediately fell in love with him. When the owner of the truck returned, Andrei approached him to talk about the puppy and ask where it came from. But the man's response was disappointing. The dog was abandoned near his farm. He and his staff sent her away several times, but she stubbornly returned. A busy road passed by the farm, and unwanted animals were often dropped off there. They couldn't leave everyone, but they tried to find new homes for them. But this poor puppy angered the farmer. He must have been hungry, and wandered into the chicken coop in search of food. He killed a few chickens, the rest also died from stress. The poor farmer did not have many resources, and the loss was ruinous for him. He wanted to get rid of the puppy, but could not decide to put it down. Instead, he decided to take him to a veterinary clinic and ask if they could euthanize him cheaply. This moved Andrei to tears. He could not allow the puppy to be put down just because he was left alone and hungry, and was just trying to survive, as his natural instinct told him that he had to do something. So he offered to take the puppy from the man, even paying for it so that the farmer could compensate for some of the losses, and in return would receive a beautiful puppy and the necessary company. There was a benefit for both sides. The man agreed on the condition that he would never see the dog on his land again. Andrei hugged the puppy to his chest, and he completely relaxed. The poor guy must have been so scared, and Andrei was glad that he managed to save him. Now he just had to decide what to do with the puppy, which he had not planned to have. He lived in an apartment without a garden, but eventually freed up enough space in the house for the puppy to play there. He named the dog Aquila, and a close bond was immediately established between them. Andrei wasn't sure if it was because Aquila knew he had saved him, or if they just had a special bond that went beyond anything he had ever experienced, but he never thought that a dog could become his best friend. They had a lot of fun together, but Andrei also had to make sure that Aquila was getting enough exercise, otherwise he could become upset and even slightly destructive. He liked to steal hats and hoodies from his master, but he was never careful with them. He gnawed on hats, and just lay on hoodies and slept. Despite Aquila's energy and playfulness, Andrei expected that the puppy would be difficult to train and obey on walks. But Aquila, to his surprise, was calm and obedient. He was content to walk at Andrew's pace and explore the surrounding forests until he saw the other dogs. Then he completely lost his head. He wanted to play with every dog he met, even those who showed no interest in him. It was nice to watch, and people always praised Andrei for his puppy's behavior. Aquila was a special dog with many talents. But there was one small problem that was difficult to solve. He just didn't stop growing. Over time, he grew huge, his black fur became even fluffier, and he grew into a beautiful adult dog. Most people were afraid of him, and their reactions made Andrei think about the large size of the dog. He tried to convince himself that this was normal for a half-breed wolf, but even he had to admit that he was a little worried that the dog might have a hormonal imbalance causing such growth. He was afraid to hear the answer from the vet, but he had to find out what was going on with his best friend. He hoped that everything was fine and the dog was just very big. But the vet didn't say what he expected at all. Andrei came to the veterinary clinic and took Aquila with him. The nurse took one look at the animal and screamed in fright. They asked to move to another room, convinced that Aquila could injure other animals or people. Andrei knew that this was not the case, but he did not argue. At that time, Aquila was only a few months old, but he was already larger than most dogs of large breeds. It was interesting to observe the reactions of people on walks when he wanted to make friends with small breed dogs. Andrei had to admit that he had suspicions that Aquilo was not exactly what he thought he was. He was convinced that his puppy was a descendant of two purebred wolfhounds, but months later he found out that his cute companion was not a dog at all. The vet laughed when he entered and saw Aquila sitting behind Andrei, resting her huge head on his shoulder. The kid clearly adored his master. But everything changed in the next few moments. The good news was that Aquila was in excellent health and everything was fine with him. The other news was that the dog was actually a wolf, namely a purebred Canadian black wolf, in whose pedigree there were no dogs. Why and how it ended up abandoned near the farmer's land was a mystery. Perhaps his pack left him behind for some reason, or someone tried to take the cub home, but soon realized their mistake. Anyway, their paths crossed with Andrei, who had been raising him as his cute puppy for several months. To say that Andrei was shocked is to say nothing. Aquilo never showed aggression, and apart from preferring meat to dry food, he never suspected that he was not an ordinary dog. Although Aquilo was tame, there was no way he could survive in the wild if Andrei released him into the wild now. At the same time, he couldn't continue to treat the wolf the same way he treated the dog. It wasn't exactly bad news, but it changed their lives. The veterinarian informed Andrei that he should contact the local wildlife services, but he was not sure what they would decide in this situation. Andrei lived in the city, in an apartment building, and it was completely unsuitable for keeping a wolf, especially one of Aquila's size. He lived in someone's backyard, walking among people and playing with pets and children who were many times smaller than him. Andrei needed to make changes to his lifestyle if he wanted to keep his best friend with him, and so, a few days later, a local wildlife inspector came to them. He had to decide whether to confiscate the wolf or allow Andrei to keep it. As soon as he saw the incredible bond between the man and the wolf, he couldn't deny it and decided not to separate them if possible. The first step was to get the wolf out of the city, since keeping such a wild animal in the city was unacceptable. Andrei sold his house, took all his savings and bought a small plot of land, which was a much more suitable place to keep a wolf. The inspector had never encountered such a situation before, so he also had to act at random. Most laws in Russia prohibited ordinary people from keeping wild animals, and he explained to Andrei that he would have to make every effort to keep the wolf at home. Many people would have just given up, but Andrei loved this wolf like his own child and was ready to do anything to keep him with him. Just the thought of Aquila ending up in an orphanage or another home and never getting petted again chilled his blood. It would be heartbreaking for both the wolf, who has become very attached to his man, and for Andrei himself. In the new area, Aquila had much more space for games and jogging, but he needed a fenced-in space to keep others safe. Andrei had to prepare everything according to the standards, because there was a huge obstacle in front of him that had to be overcome before he could breathe easy. He needed to register as a wild animal expert in order to be eligible to keep a wild animal, and to do this, he had to demonstrate that he had everything he needed to take care of a wild animal. A lot has changed in a short time, and Andrei wanted to share this with his friends and family on social media. He started with a video of his little puppy and showed how big Aquila had become. Gradually, he told his subscribers the news that Aquila was actually a wolf. People were shocked to learn that Aquila was a wolf, but most of all they were shocked by the incredible closeness between man and beast. It was amazing to see how close they were. The wolf behaved like a playful puppy, trying to bite Andrei by the ear or the hood of his hoodie, but despite his impressive size and sharp fangs, he never harmed him. He was playful, but as soon as Andrei pulled him back, he calmed down. It was amazing. Unfortunately, posting on social media has led to some unforeseen consequences. Andrei's story quickly went viral as his relatives shared cute videos on their channels and there was a real boom. Some people thought he had made a huge mistake by taking in an animal from a random farmer. Others wondered why he had never suspected that Aquila might not be a dog. Still others thought that he was not doing him any good by keeping him to himself, but, fortunately, most of the comments came from open people who understood that Andrei was guided only by Akila's interests. These people were involved in the life of a handsome man and his amazing wolf. They wanted to know what the two of them were doing day in and day out, and the number of Andrei's subscribers grew rapidly in a matter of weeks. But Andrei didn't care too much. He needed to focus on preparing the site for inspection. That he spent all his savings on setting up a wolf enclosure, prioritizing importance. Unfortunately, the inspector did not consider the aviary to be the best place for Akila. In his opinion, the wolf needed much more space for comfortable keeping. Andrei planned to let Akila out for a walk and play as often as before, but this was not enough for the inspector. He insisted on strict observance of all parameters, without any exceptions. Andrei had only a few weeks left to make the necessary changes, otherwise he would have to part with Akila. The inspector was saddened because he saw a strong bond between Andrei and the wolf, but there was nothing he could do about it. The animal had to be provided with all the conditions for its needs, otherwise Andrei could not be licensed as the owner of the shelter. In fact, the inspector should have picked up the wolf right away, but he hoped for the best for them and gave them another chance. His warning was a saving straw, but for Andrei it didn't look like that. It seemed like the end of the world to him. He didn't have a single chance to get everything ready. He spent all his savings on buying the land and bringing it to its current state. At that time, he was still working in the city, but this was not enough to carry out all the necessary improvements. He had to accept the thought that he would have to say goodbye to Akila. He wanted the separation to be as painless as possible for the wolf, so he began to communicate with him less often. But it broke the hearts of both of them. Akila became depressed because his friend no longer played with him, and Andrei did not know what to do. The wolf was too attached to him. Will he be able to survive if he is taken away from the only family he has ever known? Andrei did not know and began to get seriously ill from all these disturbing thoughts. However, something incredible happened that changed everything. One of Andrei's friends commented on one of his publications, telling about the difficulties he faced. People joined together to help him. Everyone wanted to know where the funds for the construction of the necessary facilities could be transported. And faster than Andrei could have imagined, he had enough money to make all the necessary changes. He later found out that even the inspector had contributed. When he returned to the farm to check on the progress of the work, he was incredibly pleased to see that everything was in accordance with the norms and requirements. That he had never been so happy to tell anyone good news. Andrei will be able to keep his wolf for the rest of his life. The young man was jubilant, and his online supporters rejoiced with him. Andrei began to spend a lot of time with Akila again, strengthening trust between them. Knowing that he had all the necessary documents to take care of his friend, he could finally focus on proper training. But he wasn't going to stop there. It was good that he was able to provide a home for Akila, but after his relationship with the wolf inspired him to do more, he realized that there are still many other animals that need help. Andrei just needed the resources to do it. Observing how much people were interested in Akila's story, he realized that many people want to help animals, but do not always have the skills or time to do so, but they are still ready to help those who can. Therefore, Andrei started making souvenirs with Akila and selling them online. There were also people who wanted to contribute to the care of the wolf and other animals, and he gratefully accepted their offer. But that wasn't all. People knew about his natural talent for handling animals, so every time there were reports of wolves or wolf hybrids in need of help, he was called first. And Andrei could not refuse to help any animal. An added bonus was that Akila had made friends with whom he could play. Not exactly his size, of course, since most of the wolves were smaller than him, but at least the ones he could play with without harming. But he was not limited to wolves. Any animal in need of help received shelter. For example, he recently posted a video with the new residents of his shelter, several wild boars who love to get their tummies scratched. This man has an incredible talent for establishing close relationships with a variety of animals. The day he found this puppy in a small cage in the back of a truck was the day he found his true calling. Since then, he has changed the lives of so many creatures and does not seem to be going to stop. His big dream is to create extensive grounds for all the animals in his shelter, starting with Aquila. That's what he's saving up for now. He wants to give the wolf a chance to live as close to the wild as possible, but in the safety of his shelter. Aquila, as a huge animal that loves scratching, will never be able to survive alone, but Andrei hopes to provide him with something as close to this as possible someday. But until then, he puts his whole soul and heart into surrounding the animals in his shelter with care and love. Their lives have changed dramatically since they lived in the city and thought that Aquila was a dog, but the bond between man and animal remains just as strong. It will never change. What a wonderful story. Would you keep Aquila with you if you found out about his true origins? Would you give up your whole life to open a shelter for wild animals? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Join us again for new incredible stories.